Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another instalment of the Warwick F1 show. We have just witnessed the events of the Japanese Grand Prix, which saw Max Verstappen once again showing why he is a four-time world champion. An incredible lap that he did on the Saturday to beat both McLarens, which I think none of us were really expecting to put it on pole. And then an incredibly dominant performance on the Sunday to take all available points, giving him now his fourth consecutive win in Suzuka. This puts the Dutchman just 1 point behind Norris, who still leads the championship, who really didn't have an answer for Verstappen's pace on the Sunday, apart from a very small pit exit altercation that left both drivers unpenalised. And finally, it was a huge occasion for Tsunoda. Not only it was his home race, but also his first performance in a Red Bull seat after replacing Liam Lawson after his first two poor performances in the first two races. In the end, P12 was all he was capable of, but he has maybe shown signs of life in that second Red Bull seat, something we haven't seen for a very long time, and perhaps some promising signs for his upcoming season and future with Red Bull. I am going to be your host for this episode, Callum. Unfortunately, Anwar has been having some internet connection issues, so even though he is here today and he is still joining us, I'm going to be hosting. So Anwar's joining us, and once again, we've got returning guests, Lucy and Daniel. Thank you both. Thank you all very much for joining me today. So if I hand over to Anwar first, he's going to give us our race rundown. So Anwar, if you want to take it away, what was our order that we were left with after the Sunday in Suzuka?
Cool, thanks, Callum. We had all 20 drivers finish this race, which is becoming a little bit more regular as we go into this kind of new era of Formula One. Verstappen, as Callum mentioned, took a dominant win, with Norris and Piastri close behind in tandem, only 2.1 seconds separating the top three. Leclerc was quite far away back in fourth, and he was closely followed by Russell and Antonelli, who had a pretty good performance, I'd say. Hamilton was further behind in seventh, followed by Hadjar in eighth, who again showing promise in that RB. Ninth was Albon, who again is showing good performance in the Williams. It seems like they've got a good car this year. And the last of the point scorers was Ollie Behrman, who again is outperformed Esteban Ocon in the other Haas. Outside the points, Alonso was 11th, followed by Yuki Tsunoda, who wasn't able to make his way through the field as quickly as he would have hoped in that second Red Bull. 13th was Pierre Gasly, with Carlos Sainz in 14th. Jack Doohan finished in 15th, and after that it was Hulkenberg in 16th, Lawson in 17th, Ocon in 18th, Bortoleto in 19th, and Stroll, who had a bit of a dismal race compared to his first set of races this season, bringing up the rear. So all 20 drivers finishing, that was your running order.
Thank you very much, Anwar, for that race rundown. So first off, I want to, as we usually do, I'm going to get everyone's thoughts on the race. So Lucy, if we start with you first, what were your thoughts coming out of Sunday? I imagine that for all of us, it's not going to be that much of a high rating, because even though we have a lot to talk about in terms of the results that are coming out of that race, it wasn't really eventful, was it, Lucy?
Yeah, I'd say not to be too harsh, but my overall thoughts were that it was not worth waking up at 6 a.m. for. But no, I agree. Well, in terms of like possible implications for the championships, I mean, the thing with when everyone finishes a race is that it does at least give you a good gauge of where all the cars are actually sitting. So that's nice, I guess. But yeah, in terms of maybe championship implications and who's going to be contenders and things like that, it was good, but I'm 90% sure that there were a single digit number of actual overtakes, and kind of arguably even the pit stops weren't that interesting because everyone just pitted at the same time. Antonelli greatly increased the pit stop interest by going really long on that set of mediums, but apart from that, I'd say it was still interesting. It was still an F1 race. I still woke up. I still enjoyed it. That I may be biased as anytime Williams score points, it's going to up the rating, in my opinion. I'm going to give it a 3.5, I think.
Oh, that is quite low. But I can't really blame you, to be fair. The pit stop. Sorry, go on, Anwar.
I would describe that as generous. 3.5. It was drab.
Oh, go on then, Anwar. So you'd give it lower then?
Yes, I would give it 2. Yeah, it was that bad. Like, I think also it's the fact that I had to wake up at 6 o'clock to watch it, and you saw
That's probably,
absolutely
yeah, that's a
nothing.
good point.
That
I'm
there
not
is a little
giving it
bit
a
of
two.
that.
I'm not giving it a two because we've still got Monaco to come this season, which will probably have even less overtaking. So I need to save the smaller numbers.
That's probably fair. There's a bit of emotion in my 2 out of 10, but regardless, that's what I'm going to score it. It was horrible.
No, we're absolutely right. Some very minimal number of overtakes, even less ones that we can actually remember. And I think Mercedes, as Lucy mentioned, maybe doing something interesting with the pit stops, with I think splitting the strategies between Russell and Antonelli. But apart from that, everyone was doing similar sorts of strategies. Daniel, are you along similar lines with that, in that it was maybe not really a race to remember as such?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly wasn't a classic, to say the least. We could get into kind of why it wasn't maybe the best race, which is obviously there was resurfacing in the first sector of the track, which means there was lower degradation on the tyres, and that meant that, as well as bringing the C1, C2, and C3, which are the hardest compound tyres, there was kind of not enough degradation, which means the cars are still going at very high speed. So there's so much dirty air being thrown to the cars behind that there's kind of not enough traction out of slow and not enough speed that you can carry through high speed to kind of catch up to the cars in front. And of course, with only one DRS zone, there's not really enough opportunity to close up and overtake. I did do a little. I looked at the standings and tried to do a little count of the number of on-track overtakes there were, not including first lap. I think it was about 50. So you weren't too far off, Lucy, which is crazy because I saw something that Japan has an average of 47 overtakes per race in the race leading up to this one.
Wow.
So
okay.
It's way below average for Japan, which is quite disappointing. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't bode so well for the rest of this generation of cars, but let's not be too knee-jerk. We can see where the rest of this triple header goes and then make it, I think.
To be fair, I'm actually with that statistic. I think the thing that surprises me is how high the average number of overtakes is. To be honest, because we know going into, as you mentioned already, it's only got one DRS zone, Japan, and also being quite a narrow circuit. So not that we were expecting loads of overtakes, but perhaps nothing as bad as we actually got. But we'll move on to talking about the drivers and the end standings, and where to start other than Max Verstappen. What an incredible performance he puts in, once again showing how good he can how good he can make that Red Bull car, and he can really drag it up the grid where others can't. Certainly starting off well on the Saturday with a lap that none of us were expecting, I don't think. So many of us were surprised to see that he got pole. A lot of us probably, apart from myself actually, that went with I think Verstappen as a pole position. But certainly when looking at the Q1 and Q2 and all the practice sessions, I think we were not mistaken in thinking that McLaren were going to dominate as they did. And then McLaren really didn't have an answer for them on the Sunday either. So, Anwar, if I'll ask you first. So with that performance from Verstappen, what an incredible performance it was. And does that make him a serious title contender for the rest of the season with a performance like that?
I mean, I thought it was an incredibly impressive weekend overall from him. And I feel we got reminded as to why he's a 4-time world champion. So I think it was really impressive. He dominated. He felt really in control throughout. I would probably slow down and say he isn't a title challenger yet, just because we don't know if this is something he's able to he's able to replicate it in terms of ability, but we don't know if the car's going to be there for him every race. But he's been unbelievably consistent so far this year. So he's absolutely. I think there's only a 1 point difference between him and Norris at the top of the championship, and it makes complete sense why that is. So I think it's actually a bit of a reminder to everyone to not discount him out of it yet. I wouldn't say this is a definitive performance to say he's definitely going to be in the hunt between him and Norris and Piastri, but we were reminded by his class today. not today, but this weekend.
Daniel, did you see anything kind of like that performance as well, along with the lines of what Anwar just said? I mean, we know that always Verstappen's going to be up there, but I think a lot of us were surprised just to see that he was actually able to fight for the win and dominate as he did on the Sunday. Were you maybe expecting not just Verstappen to maybe not extract as much pace out of that car, but also maybe the McLarens to be a little bit more of a challenge for him on the Sunday?
Yeah, I think there was one place in particular where Verstappen won this race and the McLarens lost, and that was the final run in Q3. I don't think anyone expected it to be as hard to overtake in the race as it was, but the fact that Verstappen put in such a blunder in Q3, I think in the final chicane he made up about 3.5 tenths of Norris through that section alone, and then he took pole by just over 100th of a second. So it's tiny, fine margins, but just absolutely sending it, being aggressive as Max does in the car so well for that qualifying. And in terms of Piastri, he got close as well, but he had big oversteer in turn 2, I think it was, in his Q3 lap, which cost him. So maybe it's a case of these McLaren drivers pushing each other on so hard that they're kind of making mistakes and then opening the door to Max Verstappen when we know that doesn't make those mistakes. He maximizes what he has, and I don't think the McLaren drivers did that in qualifying. But also, there was another aspect to it. A masterstroke from Red Bull on the setup side, in that they ran Verstappen with quite a low rear wing, which means not much downforce in the corners, but a lot of straight line speed. And with how much dirty air there was anyway, Lando Norris just could not get close coming out of the chicane onto the main straight. Verstappen had more straight line speed, and even if Norris did have the DRS, I'm not sure he could really had enough overspeed to make much of a difference. So I think the race was won in qualifying for Verstappen. It was a once in a season lap. It was that good. To remain in contention through the first sector with the setup that he was using and the force levels that he had was seriously impressive. And we've seen it a lot. I think it's Max's best track, personally. He enjoys Spa the most, but we've just seen him put in so many dominant performances in Suzuka. And I think it's probably fair to say Red Bull had about maybe the third fastest car this weekend. And look what he's done with it. Says it all, really.
Yeah, it kind of gave me the memories of 2018 Hamilton in Singapore. Just the fact that when you're watching the car, you just think he is not making a single mistake on that lap, and you're just in awe of how good the lap is and how faultless the drive is for that single lap. And it really was an incredible performance from him on the Saturday. And I totally agree with you, Daniel, that that's where the race was won, especially with how we weren't expecting the Sunday to not have as many overtaking opportunities. A bit like a Monaco qualifying in a way of how important that is. But you mentioned that come the end of the race, Norris didn't seem to have the pace to keep up with Verstappen, and it didn't seem to be mounting any sort of challenge on him or putting any sort of pressure on him. If anything, it was Piastri that was putting pressure on Norris for second place. Norris didn't really seem to have any sort of answer to Verstappen's pace. Lucy, there was a call near the end of the race for the McLaren drivers to swap around because Piastri seemed to think that he had the pace to challenge Verstappen and to maybe put some pressure on him for the win. Do you think they made the right call in keeping the positions as to how they were, or do you think that they should have maybe given Piastri a chance, given that he was less than a second behind Norris and most likely losing time to Norris, being in that third position and being so close behind him?
I mean, a couple of things. I mean, I think that while Piastri at that point in the race may have had more pace, given how difficult it was for anyone to make any overtakes, not just up the front, I don't reckon it would have actually made a difference, because even had he been able to get close to Verstappen, he still would have had the same issues that Norris suffered with, of getting trapped in the dirty air and just not having the straight line speed to get past. But I also think that kind of ultimately, maybe if McLaren should have done anything differently, which, benefit of hindsight and everything. It probably should have come earlier when they were doing the pit stops, because McLaren did have an advantage coming into this in that their drivers were in second and third, while Verstappen's teammate was starting in 15th and ended up in 12th. And so realistically, that meant when it came to strategies, they could have taken that opportunity to split the strategies and do something different, in a way to kind of try and catch Red Bull out, maybe by kind of simultaneously trying to undercut and overcut. And, we did kind of see from Antonelli going really, really long and then ending up in 6th again, that the overcut and the undercut didn't really work. But I still think that McLaren had the chance to kind of put pressure on Red Bull in terms of strategy by using the fact they had both cars there, and kind of ultimately they should have maybe done something different with that. And then who knows, maybe we wouldn't even be having this discussion about which of the McLaren drivers should have ended up in second and which should have ended up in third, because one of them would have been in first ahead of Verstappen after the pit stop phase.
It's a very good point. It does seem like the McLarens, at least partway through, were almost happy to settle for a second and third position and not really challenging Verstappen. They didn't really. I think especially at the end of the race, they maybe didn't want to take any risks because they maybe were worried about dropping even further back in the grid at the risk of getting Verstappen, compared to maybe if say a team like Ferrari or Mercedes who were a little bit further back. They may want to take more risks because they're already not in a very good position. But for McLaren's in second and third, that's still a decent points haul for both of those drivers. So maybe they didn't want to take too much risks, but they really didn't do anything different to Verstappen, really just following along in the similar kind of strategy he did. And I guess they had the pace in the car to be able to achieve that. But Anwar, do you think that McLaren should have done anything different? Or do you think, surely they'll be disappointed with that performance, but do you think there's anything they could have done different on the day, on the Sunday, or maybe on the Saturday in qualifying, which meant that they could have gotten the win at the end of the day?
I think the only thing I can really point to is the pit stop strategy. I felt they should have at least tried something different rather than pit on the same lap. But in terms of Norris and Verstappen, in truth, I know there was lots of people saying they should have swapped the cars. If Piastri wasn't able to overtake Norris, what chance does he have of overtaking Verstappen? At least that was my opinion. So I kind of do think that the difference here was the strategy. They could have tried something, they didn't. They played it a bit safe. And to be honest, I think McLaren will be disappointed, but they won't be kicking themselves at the result, because ultimately it came as a result of a Verstappen that was out of this world. And although he's capable of doing it every weekend, I don't think the car's going to be capable of providing him with the resource, I guess, to be able to put it on pole every week. So they'll be disappointed, but they won't be beating themselves up about it. At least that's what I think.
The only time that Norris and Verstappen did seem to properly come close in the race was the pit stop incident, which I think I want to go into a little bit now. And I think that's the main incident that I can remember coming out of the race. Probably that's a nod to how boring the actual race was, but it was the one interesting incident that we got. For those who can't quite remember or weren't able to watch the Japanese Grand Prix, then both Verstappen and Norris came into the pits at similar times, but because McLaren obviously won the constructors last year, they were able to get the furthest pit box down the pit lane, and that meant that when they came out of the pits and on the pit exit, Norris was just behind and side by side to Verstappen, and then this led to Norris going into the grass and falling a significant amount behind Verstappen. Norris seemed to think that he was forced off by Verstappen, but then Verstappen seemed to think that Norris just drove himself into the grass and there's nothing else he could have done. Daniel, do you think that the stewards got it right this time with not blaming anyone for the incident, really? Or do you think that they maybe should have thought about penalising Verstappen for forcing off, as Norris claimed?
Well, no. The stewards got it right this time, I think. There were a couple of factors that kind of contributed to Norris getting such a good exit from the pit exit. and kind of having a half a chance on Verstappen. So Verstappen obviously had that slow pit stop. It was about a second slower than the McLaren stop off. But then it was kind of strange because on the actual exit line out of the pits, Verstappen was quite slow to release the pit lane speed limiter, but Norris was kind of bang on with that one. He hammered it off, hammered the throttle, and got quite good. That kind of asphalt that he was running on was quickly running out of room. He didn't get a good enough launch that he could overtake Verstappen, as it were, at that exit. So he kind of got alongside, and it would have kind of been tough to bail out at that moment because he was, he would have been desperate to get ahead. He knows how much track position means, and so he was kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, those being Verstappen and the grass in that situation. And obviously, Max doesn't give him any room. There was room for Max to give, but he definitely wasn't to give it. I don't blame him at all for what he did. He just maintained his line. He didn't move an awful lot, but it was kind of a momentary, I think is the word, from Norris as he was emerging and he saw the grass closing in on him. Verstappen wasn't moving over to where there was space. Just kind of phoned it in. He pushed me off onto the grass. I don't think he really believed it, but he was hoping that maybe something would come of it. I mean, you have to in that, when they're kind of now locked in a title fight, 1 point between them, you need every advantage you can get. So I don't blame him. I don't blame either of them. I just think it was a bizarre incident that could have been avoided if McLaren were actually proactive in their strategies and not so conservative as they seem to be recently.
No, you make a very good point. And also, I think something that was mentioned on the commentary as well is that I think if Verstappen moved over anymore to let Norris out of the grass and essentially let him race him, then he would have ended up crossing the white line, which would have penalised him, which you're not allowed to do. So it's certainly in my mind, when the incident happened, it didn't really seem that Verstappen could have done any more. You're right that it was very strange that he even gave Norris a chance to. Obviously, he had a very slow stop and he was very slow to release the pit limiter, which meant that Norris did get that initial boost of acceleration. They would have probably been side by side if there was enough room on the tarmac. Obviously, Norris ends up going into the grass, which slowed him down. Lucy, do you think that's? Are you thinking along similar lines that it maybe was just a racing incident? There wasn't really much else that either driver could have done. It was just a shame that that the events transpired in that way, or maybe do you even think that some people are actually even calling that that McLaren gave Norris a penalty because it was an unsafe release, releasing him into the path of Verstappen, because it was Verstappen's room at the end of the day. So, are you along similar lines that it should have remained unpenalised and went with the steward's way, or should either driver have been given a penalty?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of it was a racing incident at the end of the day. Verstappen kind of really had, as it's been said, Verstappen really had nowhere else to go. He either crossed the white line and got a penalty probably for doing that, or he didn't cross the white line and then didn't give Norris that space on the tarmac, because ultimately kind of the pit exit's not really designed for two cars. But no, to be honest, I don't fully remember the pit stop phases. I was half asleep, but I think if anything, it would lean more towards, did McLaren kind of was there enough of a gap for Norris to be released into, as opposed to did Verstappen do something wrong? But I definitely think that Verstappen having a slow pit stop probably just slightly messed up the timing orders of everything, and kind of McLaren weren't expecting that, and then it kind of just ended up with them both there at the same time, and it was unfortunate that Norris got pushed onto the grass, but kind of there wasn't any other way it was going to go, and it kind of wasn't anyone's fault that happened.
No, that's a very good point. And yeah, I think maybe the Stewarts did end up with the right decision in the end. Obviously, this kind of in the end, unfortunately, Norris was probably better to just tuck in behind Verstappen, as he did lose a lot of time going onto the grass, which is why he had such a big gap to reduce when it came to the final push for both drivers at the end of the race. I'm going to move it on now, though, to the second Red Bull seat, because, as we mentioned, this was a very important race for Tsunoda coming in to the second Red Bull seat, something that which he's probably been wanting, and people have been calling for him to have for the past few years now, really, especially when Perez wasn't doing so well, and then obviously they gave the seat to Liam, the young and inexperienced Liam Lawson compared to him. But now he was in that seat, and typically as well, it actually being on his home race as well. And in the end, he finished 12th, which was better than what Lawson was doing. Lawson obviously only was finishing dead last and not getting out of Q1. Tsunoda did get into Q2, but that was all that he was good for. Anwar, how would you judge this performance from Tsunoda? Because it is very difficult, because it's obviously not what Red Bull are wanting. They're wanting points. They're wanting consistent points out of this second Red Bull seat to make some valuable contributions to the constructors. That's not what Perez was able to do. That's not what Lawson was able to do. That's what they want. But also, I feel like it's important to have something in mind that Lawson was only good as 20th. So this is actually an improvement on what they had before. So would you judge this as a good performance from Tsunoda's first race in the Red Bull seat?
I mean, I don't think it was terrible, so I think that's an improvement on Lawson. I wouldn't say that this race did anything to put me off Tsunoda. I guess the race performance, there wasn't much he can do when overtaking was as difficult as it was proven this weekend. So I guess we kind of have to judge him. We've got all we can judge him at the moment is the fact that he didn't really make any errors across the weekend. He was slow in Q2. Outside of that, I guess his demeanour was a little bit better than what Lawson put up in terms of his behaviour off track. So I would probably say positive signs for sure, and not a total disaster, which is not the same as what we could say for Liam Lawson's performance in the Red Bull in the first two races.
Daniel, do you think that there was anything more that we could have expected from Tsunoda in this race, given the circumstances?
No, I don't think we reasonably could have expected any more. I doubt Red Bull would have expected any more than what he delivered, to be honest. Maybe after practice, and especially after Q1, when he within a tenth of Verstappen, I think everyone was thinking, "Oh, hold on, Yuki can drive this car. We're going to get a decent Red Bull number 2 for once." But then Q2, and he was kind of struck by the difficulties of that Red Bull. He just had oversteer in the first few corners, or no, I think he made a mistake actually. He carried way too much speed into those corners, so he was maybe pushing it a bit too much on that front. But that's to be expected when he's in a new team and he hasn't quite found the limit of where he needs to be yet. So all in all, I think it was a decent showing. Like Anwar said, much better than any promise that Lawson showed. Not that he did show any promise, but a step up, I'd say, from the two kind of Red Bull number 2 drivers, let's say.
Yeah, certainly. I think it is very difficult to judge at the moment, but certainly a step in the right direction. I mean, the good thing for him is he didn't really have much to live up to, as we mentioned, with him coming in. Obviously, Lawson was absolutely nowhere in that Red Bull car. But yeah, maybe hope from personally. I think just hoped a bit more from him, especially as it's home race, and it would have maybe been nice to score some points, but not anything, unfortunately. But hopefully he is going to be able to improve on his performance to maybe deliver with some points in future. And just quickly before we go into our predictions, especially as Lucy is on the podcast, I think we should talk about Williams. And why not? Because they've been doing absolutely amazingly so far, especially Alex Albon, who has scored points in the last in all races this season, the past 3 races, which I think for Williams, who ended up finishing in 9th last season, quite wrongfully, I think, because I do think it was just, again, I've mentioned on this podcast that even though I don't think they were the 9th fastest team, it's just because of that very freak Alpine performance of getting that good performance in Brazil. That really kind of switched up the order of things come later in the season. But now points from all 3 races for Albon is brilliant. But Lucy, I wanted to ask you actually about Carlos Sainz, because he has only scored a single point this season, which is miles behind the pace and the promise that what Albon has showed. And I know that it is still Sainz trying to get to grips with the car, and it's still only his first few races. Is the lack of points haul from Sainz so far any sort of concern, or is James Vowles still going to be pretty comfortable with the positions of his 2 drivers at the moment?
I mean, I think if it continues that Albon keeps on scoring lots of points while Sainz doesn't, Williams may start having a look at to why that might be, not necessarily whether there's a problem with his driving, but even more on the lines of, do they need to make like setup changes for his car specifically for the way he drives? I think right now, 3 races in, it shouldn't be too much of a concern, because bar Australia where he DNF'd, he has kind of always been fairly close. Like, he's been outside the points, but this race he wasn't Stroll languishing in 20th. Given how tight the midfield is, while it means that if kind of there seems to be a performance gap between him and Albon, Williams might start to get concerned. It also makes it more explainable as to why there's not kind of 2 drivers scoring points consistently, because you've got RB, you've got Haas, you've got even Alpine, even though they haven't scored a point yet, will probably be up there at some point. And Williams all fighting for these same positions. So the fact that he's not scored a lot of points yet probably wouldn't be too much of a concern. But I'm not Williams management, so I don't actually know.
No, you make a very good point. And also I think something that should be taken into account is obviously the pace in the Williams car, especially for a lot of races last season, wasn't brilliant. And they've made a lot of changes to the setup this year. And maybe it's actually a case that they don't properly, then, or at least to us, or at least to me at least, I'm not completely sure where Williams actually stand. I don't know whether it's because Albon is performing at where the car actually is, and Sainz is not doing very well, and that's actually the new pace of the Williams car because of all the upgrades that they've made. Or is it once again a case of Albon dragging that car up the grid, and Sainz is maybe closer to the true pace? We don't really know, especially with how much promise Williams had coming into the season with the upgrades, the new big sponsorship as well. And so we're going to have to maybe wait a few more races to actually find out with that. But we're going to move on now from the main race and the events to our predictions. So last time around we had myself, Anwar, Daniel, and also guest Oran making predictions, and so we're going to be reviewing those now. So once again, we have a slightly different format from what we have last season. So we are predicting our top 5. If you get a person exactly spot on in the correct position, you get 3 points. If they're 1 off, you get 1 point. And we've also predicted our pole position, a driver to DNF, which actually won't matter this race because no one DNF'd. And we also made a wild prediction. So we'll go through those now. Daniel, do you have your predictions there? And if so, would you want to go first and in reviewing your predictions from last time around?
I do, and I will. Okay, so pole position, and it was very close, only about 100th off, so never mind. First position in the race, I went for Oscar Piastri, so no points for that one. Max was second. He did even better than I thought, and I thought I was being optimistic, but there we are. So that's a point. Norris was third in the race, obviously second place. Got 4 and 5th correct, actually, surprisingly, given that I had no evidence for these two at all, but I put Leclerc 4th and Russell 5th, which was good. DNF, I should have said the fans, really, because I'm sure many people were falling back asleep during that race, and I stayed awake to see that Albon did not, in fact, DNF, and there were no retirements. Random prediction, I said Hadjar points, because Racing Bulls won't fumble. I mean, they did for Lawson. They tried something quite unique, let's say, but Hadjar with a cheeky little 8th place first of the season. Very impressive.
So if I'm not correct in saying that's 13 points, am I correct in saying? So Daniel's had silently a really good weekend actually. I'm so surprised with that. That's brilliant.
That's the
Yes,
highest score we've got so far. So
the highest we've got.
that's impressive.
Interesting.
Is
Okay.
I'm celebrating
That's
that one
Yes.
tonight.
We'll have to wait.
How many
we'll have to
points
wait
do you
later.
get for random prediction again? I can never remember.
5.
5 points for the random prediction. So that's basically the equivalent of our 3-point prediction from last year. So
In
but yeah,
retrospect, this wasn't. 5 points for that is a little bit generous.
no,
Yeah,
we
but
can't.
come on,
we
it was
can't say
supposed
that
to
now.
rain
We
and
can't
Hajar-
say that now. We should remember he's in a
come
racing bull as well, and he is a rookie. So I think that
Yeah.
maybe I think they're allowable. No, we have to. I think it's pretty clear we have to challenge them before they actually happen. But so we'll allow it for now. But yeah, some really impressive predictions from Daniel there. Anwar, if you wanted to, you've got Oran's prediction there. So did you want to go through before we do our predictions? Did you want to go through Oran's and see how he got on?
Cool. So what we're doing with guest predictions is we're having a little bit of a guest leaderboard, which we're going to run through the season. So Oran is the first person to set his score on this. So he put a Norris pole, which unfortunately did not happen. He also said Norris would convert and win the race. Now, if he finished second, so he'll get a point there. He'll also get a point for Piastri in second, because Piastri finished third. He's one position off. He got no points for the Antonelli podium, which I had a lot of respect for him putting down, because it's nice and bold, and I do like a good bold prediction. So 0 points there. Verstappen 4. He obviously won, so no points there. Did get Russell correct in 5th, so he'll get 3 points there. He said Hajar to DNF. Obviously didn't happen, and unfortunately his Antonelli wild prediction podium did not happen either. So the first entry on our guest leaderboard is 5 points for Oran. It's a bit of a rough weekend for anyone who wasn't Daniel, though.
You make a very good point. I'm actually glad we've read out Oran's prediction before mine, because it actually makes mine look a little bit better. So for pole position, I did actually predict Max Verstappen. So that's good. Got 3 points from that. And that is where my predictions pretty much end, to be honest. So I got Norris in first and Verstappen in second. So I did say that Norris would overtake Verstappen in the race at some point. Maybe didn't expect how difficult it was going to be for the overtaking opportunities in Japan. So that's 1 point for each of those. So just didn't get those the right way around. Said Russell would be in third. I thought the Mercedes would be slightly more up there, especially, or at least Russell. Piastri in fourth, so that's 1 place off. Piastri obviously rounded out the podium in third, and then Hamilton, who was in fifth. Where did actually Hamilton finish in the end? I'm trying to look now. Was it seventh? Seventh, yes, it was seventh. Okay, but yeah, no points for that position though. Obviously, a driver to DNF we didn't get because there was no driver that DNF'd. We can't say that no one DNF'd, so I did say do him, but he did manage to finish the race. And my random prediction was that Tsunoda would not make Q2. And I have to say, to my surprise, and I'm very happy that he was able to do this, he did make Q2. Only Q2, he did not manage to get to Q3, but that means my random prediction did not come true. So that is just 6 points for me. And yeah, so not overly great either. Anwar, you've got your own predictions to go with. So to round out the predictions, how did you do?
Oh, this is straight heat coming out of my predictions, because I think it's the worst of the lot. So I also said
really?
pole. Yeah, I also said Norris on pole, which didn't happen. So good start there. I put Norris first, Verstappen second, so it's 1 point apiece for the top two. I put Russell in third, so no points there. I put Piastri in fourth, that gets me an extra point. I put Antonelli in fifth, so I think I was kind of convinced by Oran and just had to ride high with Antonelli and got a point out of it, so can't complain too much. My driver at DNF was naturally going to be nothing because no one DNF, so I put Science down, didn't happen. And my wild prediction couldn't be further from the truth, because I was high on the Lance Stroll train. I was riding that all the way to the end of the season. And turns out he disappointed me and went back to regular Stroll. And he decided to finish 1 lap behind everyone else. So my prediction was he finished top 8. He finished last and by a comfortable margin. So honestly, probably deserved negative points there, if I'm being honest. But here we are.
I mean,
So 4
to
points
be
in
fair,
total.
I can't really blame you because Stroll, before this race, has been cooking for the season. He finished 6th in Australia and then 9th in China. So been scoring some good points. But yes, I think this race maybe got a bit of a sign of the old Stroll. So yeah,
Kitchen is well and
good.
truly burnt down.
Yeah, we'll have to see if he's decaying back into the old Stroll for the next few races. But that will have to wait and see. Some really good predictions there. So obviously we've got now this is the first race in the triple header, so we're going to have our preview for the Bahrain Grand Prix that'll be coming out in just the next couple of days, and obviously we'll have a review and a preview for Saudi Arabia, which will be the last race of the triple header. We'll have episodes out discussing all of those in due course. But until then, that's all of us. That's all from here in the studio. Thank you very much, Lucy, Daniel, and Anwar for joining me. I've been your host, Callum, and until next time, goodbye.